Globally, the supplement industry is worth $225 billion.
It's crazy.
Or thereabouts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's definitely worth something. It's definitely worth talking about. There are a lot of misconceptions surrounding the industry. And lately, headlines were generated when a report was published finding that many protein powders, which most people assume that protein powders are just universally clean, right? It was revealed that many actually are covertly harbor heavy metals and other contaminants. What can you tell us about that report and maybe, what you guys do differently?
Yeah, sure. But I think that's a really good point going into it, because you buy a protein powder because you're doing something healthy. So that's where we definitely do not want to have like the side effect of contaminants like heavy metals. Like we all agree heavy metals are not good for you. There's nobody saying in the health and wellness industry, you need just a little bit of heavy metals, that's good, right? Like so we all agree on something here. We want to get to as close to zero as possible on heavy metals, right? So that's one side of it. The other side of it is, when you go out and buy a Big Mac or something like that, you kind of know that it's not probably the best for you. But when you buy a protein powder and you make your morning smoothie, you pretty damn should think that this is good for you and it's something that's doing me good. So finding in that study, that Clean Label Project's recent study, it was tested like 83% of the US market, 160 different protein powders. So it's a really representative study because it really dives into it. 47% of them, like almost half, had above Proposition 65 levels of heavy metals found in them. So we're at a point where it's not just now and then. There's a few sinners in it. It's one of the things is awareness. So there's not enough focus because most people and brands and ingredients are not testing on heavy metals. So again, coming back to, do you want lead in your morning smoothie or not? You probably don't, right? Like we're trying to avoid that. So
how do heavy metals typically make their way into these protein powders?
I think most of it you'll see come from soil, so from the ground. And that's also where we see, generally you see the whey proteins that has gone through an animal versus a plant protein that's come directly from the soil tend to do better. So you see more heavy metals in the vegan protein powders or the plant-based protein powders versus the whey-based protein powders, which is interesting too.
It's so, it is so crazy that people might be thinking that they're doing their health a favor by, taking one of these super convenient protein powders to hit their protein targets for the day.
And again, we can agree on that. Like it's hard to actually reach your protein targets, whether you're like an omnivore or vegetarian or whatnot. It's hard to reach maybe that, like 1 gram per pound of body weight. It requires quite a lot. So adding a protein powder is super convenient. So it feels so it feels so insane that you're potentially adding a dose of, especially lead was what we saw a lot of in the study, into that smoothie as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely wild. I feel for people that are being unwittingly exposed to these contaminants. It's similar to me, like when people eat like a salad and they use many of these commercial salad dressings that have some of the worst ingredients in them. Yeah. It's like you're taking your healthiest
you're trying
dish of the day,
exactly.
Or one of them.
Yeah.
And you're just like dousing, whether it's soybean oil or carrageenan and all these other additives that don't need to be there.
For sure. And again, like lead doesn't need to be there. It might be there due to how we've treated the planet over time, so it makes sense. But there's a way to get around it. And first of all, it's like the clarity, the transparency around it, right? Because obviously when you have a full category, I sincerely don't believe that the brands know that they have these amounts of protein, or heavy metals in the products. Again, you see brands focusing on, and I'll throw out another crazy stat. Because another thing is we see generally the organic protein powders had more than double the amount of heavy metals than the non-organic protein powders.
Why might that be?
So I'll come back to that in a second, because without knowing the data of all the different brands, because that was not released in this study, so we don't know like what's up and down on that side. But if my guess is that a lot of the plant-based protein powders are the organic ones, and you see generally more whey protein powders that are not organic. So I think that could be one of the reasons, because we know the plants in general have more heavy metals in them versus the whey proteins.
So you're saying it's just like a selection bias, like more plant.
It doesn't need to be due to the organic side of it. But we just think that more. That's my guess, and again, it's a guess based on the report that was published. I don't know the numbers, so I can't say it's. But I think it's a fairly educated guess.
Do we know at this point, because there are many different sources for plant protein? We have pea protein, we have hemp protein, we have rice protein. Is there one that's maybe more sus than the others, or are they all generally, potentially contaminated today?
I think I would probably try to avoid rice or some of them. We see more like the arsenic and so on sneaking into rice. What we've seen, we've tested a lot of different protein powders over the last 10 years probably. What we see in general, pea tend to do better. So pea tend to do better on the purity side of it. So that's what we focused on. We also have a pea protein actually in our portfolio, but it's been one of those products where when we get peas, even from the same lot, like from the same place, from the same farmer, we see variation of 4x on the amount of heavy metals. And if you're getting borderline close to, let's say, Proposition 65 limits in your serving, a 4x difference from the same supplier is pretty. That means a horrible product versus like a product that will be within the limits, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we generally recommend the whey, because that's where we see by far a more consistent, pure, source.
Lower levels of heavy metals.
Exactly.
There was also a distinction between the different flavors, right? Like certain flavorings.
It's a very good point, yeah, because I think cacao bean, and I love cacao. Who doesn't love dark chocolate? Like a good quality cacao bean, right? So it's something, and it's a good ingredient. Like if you look at it from a nutrition perspective, like cacao is a great plant, but it tends to also be great at like removing these things out of the crust and soil. So you will tend to see more heavy metals, and especially lead and cadmium, what they saw in the cacao testing. So, and we've seen that too. So we have a cacao flavored whey protein, and we've been through, I think, maybe around 10 or 11 different organic cacao farmers and manufacturers. And we now have had to make a different set of test procedure in our production facility. So when we get the cacao beans in, even from the same area, they have to be first tested for heavy metals prior to going into production. Because the whole purpose of what we've been trying to do as a brand is we test the final product, like the end product, the consumer-facing product, the one that's would be picked on Amazon or on the website or wherever it's sold. That's where we want to see low levels of heavy metals and so on, and not necessarily in production. But since we've seen that they creep in the end product, we had to do that. Like, this is coming from the cacao, so we have to make that security procedure in there.
Smart. From a human health outcome perspective, I mean, how worrying do you think that these levels are? I mean, obviously some of the levels exceed the Prop 65 thresholds, but California is known for being very conservative.
For sure.
Yeah, like sometimes overly conservative.
I was on a podcast recently as well with Dr. Wendy Myers, and we talked about like actually the supplement industry sometimes gets some really harsh standards because of Proposition 65. And that was kind of her point. But I think we can all agree that we want to get as little heavy metal in our diet as possible. And if we think about what we actually have of tests to prove where we're getting this from, do you know your sweet potatoes? How many heavy metals are in your sweet potatoes? I don't know. No and clue. I eat quite a lot of sweet potatoes, right? So I think when it comes to something that I'm buying on a regular basis, adding to my diet as a protein powder, I would go for as close to zero. And I don't think Proposition 65 is too strict. We can adhere to it. We're not like rocket scientists or anything. We can go in that direction and get there. And I think the industry in general can, because consumers vote with their dollars, right? So if we are more people asking for it, we will change. We will find ways. There was another positive finding in that protein study, which I think is really worth mentioning, is when Clean Label Project back, I think it was 2018, did another similar protein study, very big study. They found, I think it was like more than half of the brands had BPA in them, like, bisphenol A, right, basically. And in this study, they found only 3 brands had BPA in it. So I think the brands has done a good job of saying, okay, whether it's the packaging, the facility that they're working with, cross-contamination across when they manufacture the products, they've done a good job eliminating that. So the dream is out of this study that now we will start seeing, an intended focus to remove heavy metals out of your protein powders.
So like awareness actually does drive change within the industry.
It does, because again, if I take ourselves as an example, we buy raw ingredients from the most expensive, high quality raw ingredients manufacturers around the world. And we go to them and we buy, and they don't know these data points when we test them through our labs. They say, hey, we live up to all the standards. We do everything we can. This is organic. We do, we try to do good. So my point is, when we see a data point that shows 47% of an entire category is above, there's something wrong. And the first step is the clarity and transparency. Second step is then we'll figure out how to get around it. Like we did with cacao, for example, right?
So when when consumers are vetting protein brands, should they always be looking out for like a certificate of analysis or what? Like what are the green flags in terms of what consumers should be looking out for?
I think that's a great starting point, and brands that are available and are willing to share these data points. Because you can also reach out, if they don't share it online, reach out to your brand and ask for them. But obviously, like Clean Label Project does a good job having like a Clean Label Project certification. That is just a certification, meaning they test, randomly lots over the year. I think it's 1 or 2 batches, but I think it's only like 5 or 10% of what a brand is doing. And with the variance we've seen in raw materials, we believe sincerely, like we've seen in baby food, that you need to get to a point where every single batch of every single product in a category where there's risk of contamination, like heavy metals and protein powders, should be tested every single time. So that's like the whole purpose we've tried to do with the QR code on a label, so the consumer can scan and see for itself. And I promise you, most people don't do that. So they don't scan the QR code and look for the data point. But like we should get to that point. And this has come this far that we actually have that now in baby food. With so the new baby food rule, I think it's called AB 899, the new baby food law. So now they mandatorily have to, on their website, every baby food manufacturer need to provide like heavy metal reporting, third-party tested heavy metal reporting that the consumer can access.
That's so great.
So I mean, the point is, it can be done.
It can be done, yeah. Mm-hmm. So just to recap a little bit, it's the plant protein powders that seem to be the most that tend to harbor the greatest concentration of these
heavy metals,
unwanted heavy metals, and some sources of plant protein appear to be better than others. Pea being, I suppose,
definitely pea being one of the better ones.
Yeah.
But again, like the numbers were pretty crazy, I think, on some of the plant proteins where we are up at 75% is above. So it's like, I can't recall the exact number, but it's like that's where we especially need some kind of third-party validation. And the certificate of analysis in production, I don't think that is 100% enough. Like it's a good starting point, but what we've seen sorting raw ingredients ourselves for that long, we see that it doesn't match up with what we get from our third-party lab testing. Can be very big variation in actual amount of heavy metal in the finished product. So we should be able to get there. If baby food can get there, protein powders can get there.
Yeah, especially because now, I mean, as I mentioned, like the wellness, the amount that consumers are spending on these products, it's no longer a cost issue, and economies of scale should bring down the price of testing.
For sure. It's not a cost issue, but there could be. I think we will find a supply issue when we get further down, because obviously, where does all these things come from? Whether it's Earth crust or how we treated the world, a lot of these contaminants will take a long time to actually surface in our soil. So when you look at studies on crops and so on, it can take like 30, 50, like depending on like how fast the soil is actually absorbing. It can take a lot of years. And if we look back, how much have we polluted the planet and where we're doing things? I think, unfortunately, we will continue to see things sneak into our supply chain. So, suddenly we were starting to look more at PFAS, for example. Like when a new chemical that people has been using, do we need to start testing the plants for this as well? And we're like obviously working with a lot of different laboratories to kind of get an idea, but things will continue to surface, unfortunately, due to how we treated the planet, right? So
yeah, I mean, these are like persistent environmental pollutants that have a way of finding of sneaking up into like the most unsuspecting of places.
For sure, yeah. To say it
lightly, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
so I think that's why the final product transparency is so important, because that will eliminate that. And I think we shouldn't just test. We are also looking at this sometimes where we shouldn't just be greenwashing and testing everything, because there might not be a risk of a certain, let's say. Here's not a fun story, but it's a story at least. So we were testing, our fish oils for a lot of different things. But among them, we were testing our fish oils for pesticides, which when we looked at it on the outside, will you find pesticides in wild caught anchovies from the ocean? You probably shouldn't, right? So there shouldn't be any pesticide. So isn't it a little bit of greenwashing saying it's pesticide free? We don't want to be that brand. Then, like several years in, we get a batch of our fish oil that has high amount of pesticide in it, and we're like, well, where did that come from?
Yeah, right.
And we go back in supply chain, and we end up finding out that pesticide came actually in the capsulation process, because we in our capsulation process been playing to make the gelatin a little bit more, palatable. To say that we were adding a drop of organic lemon oil to the capsule process. So when they were drying it, it got a little bit of citrusy feel to it, so it felt a little bit better. And we found out that they have actually changed the olive oil that they were, the lemon oil that they were using, without us knowing it in production. So they gone from one, and that's how this manufacturing works, right? So they just replaced it with another one, because obviously you get oil from different places. And suddenly that was a non-organic one that they mixed in, and it had pesticides in them. We know lemons can have pesticides in
Wow.
so we found, okay, wow, so we actually need to have some kind of to keep track with what we're doing. I still don't think that pesticides is what I would be most concerned about in fish oil. I don't think that. So I think that was probably more on us. I think that's where, again, it's a heavy metal and it's oxidation and it's maybe some other markers. But again, data points that we should measure in order to be able to make educated consumption.
1,000%. Yeah, I do. I definitely want to talk about fish oil, because fish oil has long been a staple in my supplement regimen, and you guys are my go-to source. I mean, I take you every day, so I definitely want to do a deep dive into that. But before we move on from protein powders, what about for people who are sensitive to dairy? I mean, this is like scary news for somebody who, whether due to digestive discomfort or maybe a lactose or casein sensitivity, can't take whey.
Yeah.
So what do they do?
I'll come with some very unsophisticated advice here, but like what I'm doing myself with dark chocolate right now, because I know there's in my dark chocolate there might be cadmium or lead and so on. So what I'm doing is I'm varying it. So I'm not buying from the exact same, which is a very unsophisticated way of saying we should have the data point so I can make a better decision. I think without knowing that, I would still go pea probably. I would go non-chocolate flavored, because otherwise you're adding the chocolate component to it. So if I had a pea protein, non-chocolate flavor, could be vanilla, it could be plain, it could be that's what I would go for on a more regular basis. And we have a product like that we've made for quite some time. We don't focus too much on it, but we always, because of our data point, obviously always live up to Proposition 65.
That's great.
So
and also, like, if you're consuming a plant protein product like once in a blue moon, would you agree that it's probably fine?
It's fine.
It's just it's about what you're consuming day in and day out.
That's the point.
Yeah, like every single morning. If it's like part of your like morning ritual to take a protein shake.
Exactly.
You're going to want to make sure it's the best that you can afford.
Exactly. I think the dose makes the poison is what we need to be aware of, right? Like, so if you're doing one here and there, you're probably fine, right? Like, I still buy a smoothie when I'm different places, or I'll go to Jonah Juice now because they actually do have a protein shake with Puori protein powder in it. So I know
amazing.
that it's not, So, but otherwise, I would definitely still go and have it, because I still want to hit my protein goals, right? Like for various reasons.
Is Puori at Joe and the Juice like globally?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that's actually, I think it speaks a little bit to Joe and the Juice as well, that they've partnered with a high quality product like that. They wanted to have something in, because most consumers have no idea. So they could pick any product if they wanted just to profit most and have the best product margin. But they were pretty adamant about having a higher quality protein powder in there. So
that's awesome.
So that's awesome. Yeah. So you can get both a whey and a pea protein there.
Somebody tagged me in something. Joe and the Juice, apparently in their juices, they use like an oil blend, and somebody had I think in the past they might have used some kind of oil blend that had maybe a little bit of a small proportion of olive oil, but then had canola oil in it. And I was like, what the hell? And then I tagged them in it, and actually Joe and the Juice corporate responded to me and said that they've long switched over their formula. It's now like 100%.
I saw that too, and I was like, God damn, guys, I didn't know that. Like, because I know they've been talking a long time about adding that little bit of olive oil to it, because it was for the fat soluble vitamins, and it made sense in the blending process and so on. I was like, that's a great add-on. So I had no idea either when I saw that as well, and I wrote the same, and I got the same response.
Message?
Hey, yeah, we changed this, and there's actually another video out there explaining that they did change it. So
I love that these brands are now like listening to consumer demands, and showing a real, I think, signal of empathy and and compassion for consumers, particularly in light of all the the health issues that people are facing today.
Me too.
Whether
yeah.
it's like Steak and Shake now making the switch from vegetable oils to frying their fries in tallow, or Sweetgreen, actually I believe was one of the first to abandon refined, bleached, and deodorized seed oils completely. And so now everything at Sweetgreen is either olive oil based or avocado oil based. True Food Kitchen, and Joe and the Juice, allegedly.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely did like they're using an olive oil that they're using now. So I agree. Like, and that's why we need the transparency out there, because I sincerely also think sometimes they don't even know. Like, they might have just had a distributor that was delivering it and they switched to another blend or something like that. That's what we see again and again and again. So it's obviously not their center of focus. Like, for many, like when you're buying an organic protein powders and there's maybe 5 ingredients and maybe one of the ingredients is not the center of focus for the supplier. Like, so you don't know. That's why you maybe need to go to that step deeper of testing that as well. But again, if we test the finished goods, we will see that something is dirty, and then we can go back in supply chain and figure out what's not the way we want it to be and optimize based on that.
That's great. And Joe and the Juice. Joe and the Juice is are they not Scandinavian or?
They are Scandinavian. They founded out of Copenhagen, Denmark, where we are from actually as well. So obviously we know them through Denmark. Denmark is a small country, but they do have like that global footprint and American investors and so on. I think it's a bigger corporation now.
So cool. When it comes to fish oil, I mean, I've always said that fish oil it's one of the few supplements where you really want to be buying at the top of what you can afford, because there is such variation. Like, fish oil is not like vitamin C, where you can basically just go and buy whatever, ascorbic acid or sodium ascorbate or whatever. It's like there isn't a huge variation from product to product with regards to a vitamin like vitamin C, for example. But with fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids, you really do want to prioritize quality.
You can see I want to jump in there because you're so right. And there's many reasons for that. Like, first of all, it's very fragile as well. Like, so one thing is the source where it comes from. Like, that's one starting point. But it's also something that's very delicate. So the way you treat it actually impacts a lot. So if we take omega-3 as an example now and just run back in the supply chain and how does it come? So it is like we use anchovies, sardines, sometimes mackerel, but mainly anchovies. That's the primary source we use. The smaller the fish in the food chain with a high fatty percentage in themselves, like fattier fish, and the smaller is both faster reproduction, but also pure when you look at environmental toxins. Like, the bigger the fish, the more they've consumed over the years, the older they tend to get and so on. So they might have more environmental toxins in them. So that's one side. Then there's the oceans you fish from. There's variation in environmental toxins from what oceans you come from. People think, the Nordics, like so pure and clean, but we actually know you shouldn't eat too much fish from where we're living. Like, you actually get recommendation if you're pregnant and so on, like, only have salmon from our areas, like, if it's wild caught, like once a month or something like that. So we are aware that there is actually, our oceans are not that pure. So we fish off the coast of Chile right now, where there's a larger school of fish. It's faster reproductive. It's extremely pure is what we're seeing on the data points. So that's first point. So with a fish oil, you have with a protein powder, you have a little bit of instant gratification. You have joy of tasting it. It's like, it feels like a meal and so on. Fish oil is a capsule that doesn't bring any joy to anybody. Like, most people think it's actually like, it's horrible to swallow fish oil and so on. And it can be if it's too oxidized. But that's a second story. So when you're doing a fish oil, you want to have EPA, DHA. That's like the two main long chain omega fatty acids why you're taking it. There's no fun in chewing in the capsule. There's no other reasons to do it. So you want to have a high potent dose of that. Like, our fish oil is 80% concentration of EPA, DHA, and other omega-3s, but mainly EPA, DHA. So it's a high dose of the capsule is actual active ingredient. So the active ingredient is one side. Then you want it to be pure. So on the other hand, so you do not want to have too many environmental toxins, whether that is heavy metals or dioxins or other things we find in fish. So those things you want to avoid. And then the last piece that most people tend to forget is oxidation. Because when you're consuming it as a consumer, it has to be fresh. You would not go to a sushi restaurant and eat like old fish. It would be horrible. And I will tell you that all of the fish oils pretty much we've tested would be above what I would eat as a sushi restaurant, right? So because the oxidation level measured in TOTOX, total oxidation in the oil, which is a measure of several things, if that number goes too high, that oil is pretty rancid. Some people will say at some point it's not even safe for human consumption. And I think there's a lot of products out there that's in that. But I think in general, you just wanted to have it fresh and pure for having those active omega-3s in your body, right? So we've been playing with as well, obviously, to get that oxidation level as low as possible. And there's several parts in that puzzle to get there. But fresh fish, like good small quality fish, is one step, and then the molecular distillation process, avoiding too many touch points with oxygen. It's often when you capsule the oil where you get more oxygen into it, and then finally we send every single batch of every single product we do. One batch goes to, like, Clean Label Project test everything for our QR code on our label, but we also send to IFAS, the International Fish Oil Standards, where generally the best. If you're looking for fish oil and Puori is not available in your region, because I would say you should take that. But if you're looking for another fish oil out there, go to IFAS, find if they have a certification, see if you can pick up your batch number, and then open that report, because that report is not very heavy. It's like 5 stars for passing 5 different criteria.
And that's IFOS?
IFOS, yeah, exactly.
And they have a website, and you can look up if a product is IFOS certified, that means that you can identify the batch on their website?
Unfortunately, I don't think it means that every single batch is uploaded. People can have one batch up there. So, like, I would go in and look and see if your batch number is there. That's one starting point, because there you will be able to see the oxidation measured in the finished goods as well. Like the finished capsule, they buy the product, like take it off your shelf, put it into the laboratory, and then they see, what are the heavy metal stages, what are dioxins and furans and different things, but also oxidation and omega-3 content. Do they actually deliver a potent dose of omega-3, which is another thing. Maybe as not as we're seeing in fish oil, but like I would say label claim accuracy on active ingredient, when we go into powdered capsules, up and down is what we see. So when you're looking at a fish oil, that's definitely something I would pay attention to. Purity, based on the absence of heavy metals and so on. Actual omega-3 content, because it's easier to make a 20% concentrated capsule with less heavy metals in it than it is to make an 80% concentration capsule with less heavy metals in it, right? Because, again, dose makes the poison. So if I'm having to consume 6 times as many capsules, it's obviously to get the same amount of omega-3, I would also get the same amount, basically following along the heavy metal sides of it.
So you're saying there's often a trade-off. Sometimes with higher potency products,
yes,
you see a higher concentration of heavy metals?
That's what you would often see.
Yeah. So how do you guys then reconcile that?
I think, again, if you have the fresh starting product, right, you can still have a high that's the point. If you can have a high potent, so it's we deliver 2,000 milligrams of omega-3 in a serving, which is 3 capsules, so the 80% concentration in the capsule, but we still have a low amount of heavy metals in it. And then the freshness. So that's the point, is you got to look at it as a consumer. Some brands will just say you need 1,000 milligrams of omega-3. Then you might get half of it. You get half of the active ingredient. You might also get half of the heavy metals and so on, because if it follows along. So that's why if you can get it up to the potent dose, what you're actually taking, and have it clean and pure, that's what you want to do.
And that's where the value of proper sourcing comes in.
Totally, yeah.
And you guys use Chilean anchovies?
So that's wow. Why we and then there's the fisheries, and there's you can narrow it fairly down based on how many people you can actually work with in the industry to get the best product. We also use fisheries that are Friend of the Sea certified, for environmental protection, to not avoiding bycatch, all the other things to have a high quality product, and that's another parameter in the
That's awesome. I will sometimes chew my fish oil capsules. People listening probably think I'm crazy for doing this, but actually, as you alluded to earlier, like a pure fish oil is not going to taste as fishy as you might expect. There might be a very subtle.
Oh, there's fish taste in it, right? But,
but it's very subtle. It's nowhere near as bad as you might think.
And that's really the oxidation number. So I would go in and look at that TOTOX score and see, okay, what we're aiming for internally is to get down to something that's closer to 6. 6 in the end product, which is what the consumer is buying, it's really low. So if you look at the average on IFOS, it's probably closer to 15 or something like that. And their standard, I think their cap is, I think it's 19 or something around that. But we're really trying, we can really feel the difference in like that test and chew the capsule feel when you have this super fresh fish oil, right? Like so.
Yeah.
And again, we use ourselves as example, like myself, people in our team, been consuming at least 2 grams of omega-3, sometimes more based on blood work when we've been playing around with different things, but for 10, 15 years. So if you, again, had a little bit of or a lot of some heavy metal or something in there, you would have been poisoning yourself. Basically.
Why does some people, this doesn't happen to me, but why do some people say that they get fishy burps?
That's often the oxidation again. But I think another common thing can be if I get fishy burps as well if I take it with a cup of coffee and I didn't have anything to eat. But if I take my fish oil with like a protein-rich meal or a decent meal, I rarely feel it. And again, if I take the capsules as some of the earlier parts of the meal, I feel even better. So I think you have ways of minimizing your own risk of getting the fish burps. But again, if you have a really rancid fish oil, you will probably feel those burps like much earlier. And this is obviously anecdotal, but we get very little feedback that people have fishy burps, like almost nothing. And when we see, it's the number one reason for many people coming to us is like, I get horrible fish burps and so on. And we tell them, just try it for once, take it with food, try it. And we feel very few people are coming back with fish burps.
What would you say are the major benefits of taking a fish oil supplement every day?
So there's in Denmark we are we are regulated as a Danish brand, meaning that there's very limited what I'm allowed to say about like how you can actually what it will do for you. Like it's very limited. I can say it's good for eyes, brain, and heart. That's pretty much it. But I think we've all seen and heard about positive balancing out your omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid balances for inflammation and so on. It's not something I'm recommending based on that. We'll need proper scientists and doctors to do that. But yeah, I think I recently saw, which I thought was really interesting as well, Dr. Rhonda Patrick's newsletter on longevity and omega-3, and I saw some interesting correlations in that. So I think in general, when we are optimized and we get enough omega-3 in our diet, which is hard to get from food, it is just you need to eat quite a lot of wild-caught fish and fatty fish to get up to the doses we actually want, and we reduce our omega-6 intake at the same time. It is a balance. I think there's a lot of health benefits in that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it's one of my staples for sure. Is there any special considerations for the maintenance of a fish oil supplement once you've opened the bottle? I mean, do you recommend refrigerating it or anything else? I
think depending a little bit on where you live. So like here in warmer climates, I would probably refrigerate it. I would make sure it's not in sunlight as well. So I would try to keep it fairly cold. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. We are playing a lot with it when we are shipping products because that's where we've seen the biggest variation. And if anybody buy a fish oil from us and they get capsule that are a little glued together, let us know, we'll replace them. It's a shipping issue because let's say the driver was going to your home and was parked in the sun for a period of time. It gets warm.
You don't know, yeah.
Yeah. So we've tried to control that as much as we can. But that's something. But I would say in general, keep them stored in a cooler, dry place, right, and out of sunlight.
Yeah. There's a lot of, in general, today, I would say there's a lot of skepticism around supplements. Some say that the industry is completely unregulated and full of low-quality products. How do you respond to a claim like that?
I normally say that I think if you have 10,000 studies pointing in one direction and 500 studies pointing in the other direction, and the evidence base of the 10,000 studies makes sense, I would lean on that. That's why products like D vitamin, magnesium, omega-3, they're so heavy evidence based that I feel comfortable in recommending that, and I do think that there's a benefit of it. And I think in the future we'll get much further down into specific blood work analysis and understanding the levels and being able to see a difference on a person's health of going from X to Y basically on a chart. But for now, I think the macro data speaks enough for itself. if you're a little skeptic, I would go with those, heavy evidence based. I wouldn't start with the newest, new science of try this new high dose amino acid product or whatever it could be. I wouldn't start there. I would start with the basic. And again, I would say if you haven't figured out your own, nutrition and working out and sleep, I would start there, right? Because supplement is a supplement to the diet. It's not gonna fix it, right? So, I think. I understand, and I've also looked at so many different products over the last 15 years that I understand the consumers are extremely confused because claims are being made left and right on doing different things. It's almost impossible to navigate, I think. And I see myself not as a scientist, but as a consumer. And I think it's pretty complicated to figure out. So again, I would really pick those there's probably 5 or 6 products that are so heavy evidence based that's where I would start.
Amen. Yeah, that's what I call the big rocks. The protein powder, the fish oil, astaxanthin. What else? Magnesium, vitamin D. Yeah,
maybe a multi even. Yeah.
And even among those that I've mentioned, there's no one size fits all. You might be hitting your protein target easily from food, right?
For sure.
Not thereby negating the necessity for a protein supplement for you. You might have perfect vitamin D levels.
For sure.
Already negating the need for a vitamin D supplement. But I mean, generally, if you have a finite budget for supplementation, which most do, myself included, you're going to want to focus on those that have the most evidence.
For sure. Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
And again, the ones that you're taking on a daily basis, that's also where I would look into spending the most, like dollars, basically. Would I want to buy a quality of, let's say, protein powder and omega-3? That's where, again, I would spend a little bit extra. Protein powder especially, because the dose is pretty big. So here we're back to, if you're taking a capsule of magnesium, it's a fairly little dose. So even if it has a concentrated, environmental toxin in there, it's not a larger dose. But if you're taking 30 grams of protein powder, it becomes a pretty decent dose of something. So I would pay even more attention. That's why, circling back to it, our dream in this space is that we get, like baby food now have gotten, a validation requirement on heavy metals in products in risk of contamination. It shouldn't be harder than that. We can get it up and running on a label, website, claim, and somebody can regulate it, so we can benchmark apples to apples and peers to peers and make good decisions, basically.
I love it. It drives me crazy when protein powders have a whole lot of carbohydrate and fat calories in them. Sometimes you see that on the market. You see protein powders that have excess fat and carbohydrates, and I'm like, where are they getting that from? I'm not buying a protein powder for carbohydrates and fats. I'm buying a protein powder for the protein.
I totally agree with you.
This is just a bunch of filler that some brands add in, or what?
I think we actually have a little carbs in it, but I also make the explanation of how much it is. So we use a little bit of organic coconut sugar in there. I think you get total of a serving, you get 5 grams of sugar, but 3 of them is added really from that. But that 3 grams of added sugar, which is very little when you look at the big picture, it's less than a date. It's a sixth of a banana, if you cut it out in that. So in your protein shake, it's very little. If you're normally blending it up with other stuff or you're eating something on the side, it's extremely little carbs. But so I get the point. But I think for us, it gives us the opportunity to decrease the amount of stevia, monk fruit, artificial flavors or natural flavors. We're not using either of these right now. We're using natural flavor, but we can use very little, because we get the round off, the sweetness. We actually kind of joke about it at the office that the flavor with the bourbon vanilla we have with real Madagascar, vanilla seeds in it, and the organic coconut sugar, we taste a big difference if we play with other type of sugars. It gets that almost that caramelized flavor to the vanilla taste. It's almost like a good creme brulee. Can we hit that feeling out of natural ingredients? We totally prefer that. But again, I would look in the back on the label, because obviously you can see fat content and carb content in all protein powders. That's something we have to share, right? So protein, carbohydrates, and fat you can always find.
Well, it's important that the protein powder, I think, is palatable, especially for a certain cohort that certainly exists that isn't willing to concede a certain flavor profile in the name of health. My dad, for example, he won't consume anything unless it's totally delicious and tastes like a genuine milkshake, like an authentic like milkshake. Whereas me, somebody who's kind of grown up around supplements and has been taking protein powders essentially his whole life, like I can take a protein powder that's primarily stevia, and the aftertaste, well, I'm consuming something that's good for me, so I'm willing to make concessions here and there.
Sure.
But I get that sometimes flavor, the amount that flavor matters is going to differ person to person.
It totally is. And like we see that as well. That differs as well from country to country. So we are generally sweeter when we're in the US. Like it will say the brands will taste sweeter. So that's what we see. And also the type of flavors. Like peanut butter is a huge flavor in the US. It's not that in Northern Europe, for example. So we see there's difference in that as well. But again, yeah, I like to, we want to use as natural the ingredients as possible, and we want to use as little of the flavoring component that is not actual, like a vanilla bean or something that has like direct, yeah.
Have you guys tried allulose at all?
No.
Allulose, it's an interesting
sweetener, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of controversial. I believe certain retailers, like Whole Foods, like won't allow products that contain allulose into the store just because it's a new product. It's naturally found in certain fruits like dates.
Yeah.
So it's not synthetic. It's a completely natural, low calorie sweetener. It has fewer calories than sugar. And there's also, I think, fairly good evidence on it. There are health benefits associated, shown clinically with allulose consumption. I think it's got an anti-hyperglycemic effect.
Interesting.
And the flavor profile is good.
Yeah, but we'll check that out. My guess is that our science team already have looked at it and said we can't probably use that in Europe as well. There might be
interesting.
Monk fruit, for example, is not like allowed in Europe yet as a sweetener. So, and that's a really common sweetener over here, like alternative to stevia. We see that in the US. So we still kind of like, we are playing with it. So we are also playing with like different types of whey protein. And if we want to make like a lower carb version, like the one that doesn't have 3 grams of added sugar to it, but we also feel right now people really enjoy the taste and we enjoy the product. And we do believe a little bit of carbs is actually good for you. And like, I think natural flavor is actually an interesting component to touch on as well, because natural flavor is also getting, especially in the US, a lot of heat. In Europe, natural flavors has to come from natural ingredients. So you would avoid some of the things you might see. That's also why we're testing for residual solvents in every single batch we do. So you don't have these different types of solvents in there. But like our natural flavor, we can use, first of all, very little because we're using like the organic coconut sugar, the vanilla flavored, the vanilla bean to it. So it's such a little amount, and that natural flavor is based on vanilla concentrate and stevia, like a little bit of stevia, and we're talking, microscopic drops of stevia. So nobody that tries our products think there's stevia in it because there isn't actually stevia in it. It's made that how you make that natural flavor. But you don't have to have that. I feel sometimes when I taste some of the brand, they're very sweetened, even though they have 0 carbs in it.
Yeah.
So they're very intense on that like flavoring profile. So flavor is different. Flavor is different from person to person and so on. So there's no one size fits all, but
totally.
But I think people that try the vanilla protein we have as well, they say they actually kind of like that flavor.
It's really good. I just had a protein shake before we got rolling on this. And, super tasty.
Even in water.
Yeah.
Like even in water. And you can make stuff tasty in a smoothie with a blender with like adding some good stuff into it as well, right? Like we use that every single day to camouflage more greens into our kids' food, right? And so on. So it's a great way of mixing things. Vanilla is such a good ingredient like that.
Oh, I love vanilla. Yeah. It's so funny. Like my palate, I feel like experiences seasons where sometimes I'm very amenable to monk fruit and stevia, and then other times I'm just nauseated even thinking about those sweeteners. It's like I guess it depends on how much I'm consuming.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, like some days I'm good with a stevia sweetened protein powder, and then other days like I get queasy at the thought.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think in general, like we see vanilla is a more like general flavor, right? Like, but I'm curious actually to see what are the next flavors and like what flavors is there outside vanilla, chocolate, like peanut butter, strawberry, and so on. Is there any flavors you're looking at particularly, or anything that you like? What's delicious?
I find it pretty hard to ignore like a birthday cake option.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't actually know what that is, like how that differs from vanilla, but
No.
yeah, but that's something that's always pretty attractive to me. Cookie dough.
Cookie dough. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, cookie dough's gangsta.
Yeah.
What else? Red velvet, big red velvet.
Okay.
Fan. Almond, anything almond, like amaretto flavored. Yeah, I'm about it.
Yeah. We'll play around. Yeah.
How do you guys get started? I know that that Puori has roots within like the CrossFit community.
Yeah, so we started actually. So my co-founder and I, we met in a CrossFit gym that I started. So I started the second CrossFit gym in Europe.
Wow.
So it was like really early days of CrossFit in 2006. So it's like a long time ago. At the time, it made sense. It was the first CrossFit gym in Denmark. So we called CrossFit Denmark. Suddenly there was CrossFit all over the place. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it was a really fun journey. And I think the journey it really took us from, that was when we got into that. So Puori was founded in 2009, but Jules and I started talking in the gym in 2008. And we started talking about, the omega-6, omega-3 and fatty acid balances. And we were feeling like our joints and inflammation. And we were just like, we were studying business, but, passionate about health and wellness. And I was a personal trainer. I was like doing everything I could in a gym basically, and I'd done that for the last 5-7 years right at that point. And then I found CrossFit and was just like everybody else in the beginning, got a little bit crazy on CrossFit, but it was just such a interesting and also very scientific journey into how to define fitness as a concept. And getting there's so much under CrossFit, like so much depth in the concept that's brilliant. Anyway, that's a different story. But so we talked about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid balances, and everybody that was like recommending, we were reading Dr. Barry Sears' The Omega RX Zone book, and everybody that was recommending if you started on adding fish oil to your diet or omega-3 to your diet was like, just make sure it's clean and pure. So we were like, that makes sense. We were like young, maybe slightly nerdy consumers in our 20s at the time. And like, okay, that's a data point. So we start calling, and first we went to the stores and start like, let's buy this fish oil. Like, how many parts per billion of lead is in your fish oil and mercury? And the people behind the counter was like looking at us like we were aliens. And like,
yeah, they don't know.
We have no idea. Like, this is great. We're selling in this, like, this should be fine. And we're like, everybody tell us to be aware of that. If we're like going into a higher dose of omega-3, you want to make sure it's pure and clean. And we went through everything we could find, and nobody wanted to share the data. We called the brands. We got no data points. We felt, okay, there's something so odd here, because in health and wellness at the time, and still, there's so many different routes to the right route. Like, there's not a right route, right? We're different. So it's not like we can go with this diet or this fitness trend. But everybody agreed that a little bit of environmental toxin was not good for you and a lot was bad for you. Nobody said, it's good with lead in your smoothie or in your fish oil or something like that. So we were like, there can't be that nobody is really sharing this data. So we felt, let's create our own fish oil. Let's reach out to find out how the fish oil industry works. Reach out to them and say, we're going to share on the front page of our website the lab report of the end product so people know. And that's how we got started. And it sounded like a great idea in the beginning. Then the idea got less and less great as you go into that startup, right? Like, and now the concept is where the mature consumer is getting at. We were a little too early out. We thought that we could go to any store and say, hey, look at this. We have the data point. It's the best fish oil you've ever seen, fresh, no environmental toxins. And, people were more interested in the marketing concept. How much were we spending on getting the brand out there? How many consumers do you have, and so on? But that's how the brand was started, and that's how Puori, Pure Origin, came about, so to speak. Like, the idea is we start with something that is super pure and clean to begin with, and and that's what we've been now implementing across like a fairly narrow portfolio. Despite the many years in business, it's a fairly narrow, but we want to try to do the common products uncommonly well, like really practicing virtuosity in these type of products, the stuff you're consuming on a daily basis.
Yeah, so, like the basics.
Yeah, the basics, yeah.
Like the capsule collection of somebody's, basic supplementation needs. Protein powder. You guys make a creatine, which I really enjoy. It combines creatine with
Taurine.
Taurine, which is a very
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
choice. You want to talk about that a
Yeah,
bit?
I can do that a bit. So one thing is, for us to create a new product, we first look at like, is there purity perspective in this? Because if everything is pure out there and it's the same ingredient, and actually creatine was our first, not natural, it's like synthetically produced. All creatine is like a synthetically produced creatines out there. So we were like, how do we differentiate in this space? So we started to buy our products and throw them through the labs to see, is there any contaminants in these? And there was a few things that we were looking at. So this actually makes sense. But at the same time, taking taurine, why did we add taurine to it? How can we differentiate a little bit? Like, how do we add something where we see a growing amount of science here, and like an interesting amino acid? Like we see something here, and it's very supportive of the same benefits you're seeing out of creatine. So a lot of the creatine benefits you're also seeing with taurine in much smaller, less heavy evidence-based studies yet, but we were like seeing that path. So we felt like that's actually an interesting add-on. So we just want to make a little, so it's not just straight creatine. And then obviously it's again tested, and we saw a little bit of heavy metals again in creatine products across, despite it being like synthetically produced. So we felt like, again, there should be a product out there we can get that heavy metals testing.
I feel like most creatine on the market comes from one place, or like there's like a very small handful of
there's a very small handful, I think. I think there's more when you dive into it than that, but it feels like it's generally the few places that are manufacturing it.
And taurine is super. There is actually a lot of good data on taurine. Like there's from blood pressure to blood sugar regulation. Like, it's not yet a part of my daily supplementation regimen, but the data on taurine in humans is very compelling.
It's compelling and growing. So yeah. So yeah. That's the reason why we decided to add that in, and
That's so cool. So what's next for Puori? What do you guys, any cool products in the pipeline that you can share with us, an exclusive?
Yeah, again, we're playing with different things. I think we want to do a little bit more on the protein side to cover more needs in that, because we are seeing a demand in getting that pure product, right? So that's where our USP stands out. So we want to help our consumers. But actually what we do is every quarter we ask our consumers. So we have some really interesting data, and we're so like appreciative and excited that our consumers will share this much. They go through some lengthy like questionnaires on different things, and they write stuff to us. So we get an idea of what's interesting for them and where they see their pain points.
Yeah.
Because what we really want to cater to is that consumer who is so into getting products that are pure and clean. Like, so where are the pain points? So I can't say that we won't go in different routes at some point. Like, I love that because
nobody's
I'm
done
an
a good
entrepreneur.
protein bar yet.
No, that's interesting too. Yeah, that's interesting.
The protein bar space?
Yeah, I think
that is ripe for disruption. I mean, there are some options now. I mean, there's a lot of activity now.
There's
I feel
a
like
lot of activity.
in the protein bar space, but nothing really stands out to me as being. I mean, some are better than others, but yeah, a good protein bar to take on the road with me.
Yeah.
That would be a boon.
Me too. Yeah. So, but for us to go that route, it's such a different supply chain, and also it's a different, very often at least, a different like sales channel, where you need for that to be a really successful like business, you need to be where the consumers want that snack. That can be on the go. That can be a lot of places. Obviously, we've seen D2C in general do a good job of people buying it and bringing it with them. But like what we also see is like a lot of that bar space is still driven by, you're on the go, you buy it in that store that's right next door where you're hungry, or the snack you need. And that's a different distribution. So I think at least the rest of our management team will say, oh, we have enough to focus on right now. Let's focus on what we do. We practice virtuosity before we jump on protein bars. But like, we're playing with different things, so we can continue to play.
Do you think that the industry would benefit from more regulation, or do you think it's, are you satisfied with the degree of regulation that it currently has?
I think we could set better rules. Like, I think there could be a few different rules that would improve the industry, and I think there's difference in Europe and in US. There definitely is. So I think what we see in Europe, like you have so many different countries we have like EFSA, European like safety standards authorities that are making different claims and what we can do, but then different countries can have different amounts of D vitamin they allow in a product. And so it becomes super complicated to serve everybody with the same product, which makes running the business much harder. So, and what you can say is also different, and how hard the regulators. In Denmark, we have visits twice a year by the food, the equivalent of the FDA. Like they're actually visiting us
Twice a year.
Wow. So they visit us, they look at how we communicate, how we market ourselves. Are we saying something that is borderline outside of what we can say within like the very defined? I think sometimes that's a little too much. And we've seen that it's been way too much for us when we are like trying to capture an American consumer. Right, like where like we're being exposed to so many different things here, right, in the U.S. So
American consumers are used to all kinds of crazy claims.
So if we're just
how do you like compete in that market?
You can't compete with say it's good for your eyes, right? Like we can't like okay, wow, like can you give me a little bit more? So we are adapting a little bit to it to the American consumer, but I think so. There's something in between. That's my point. I think we should be a little fast on updating. We've seen now, like the cost of when we've been in business, we've seen them increase the amount of D vitamin that's been allowed, like maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of the last 15 years. So like we could have gone there faster, probably, right, if somebody had spent some time on it. On the other hand, we do see and appreciate that somebody's actually, looking into there's not as much miscommunication, because the brands cannot miscommunicate that much. So like they're at least competing a little bit more on equal terms, so to speak, and not confusing the consumer with like very promising claims. So I think, could we have a little bit of both? Right now, our focus is if we can help drive the industry towards some kind of regulation on the risk of contamination, like heavy metals in protein powder. That's where we start. We can see the traction in that. We want to make sure then we've made an impact that will long last Puori. Like it will be beyond what we are doing, and it will hopefully help people in the future, right?
Yeah,
so that's the goal.
I totally agree. I think, you shouldn't be able to make crazy claims. You shouldn't be able to instill false hope, especially for disease states.
No. Yeah.
And I say that as, being the son of somebody who is suffering from myriad chronic diseases. And there are a lot of crazy claims out there in the supplement space. Not necessarily, they're a bit more obfuscated. They target a different demographic, but they exist.
Yeah.
They exist. Supplements with supplement companies with predatory marketing practices. They definitely exist. And then I think you should be getting what you're paying for. And when you're integrating a new healthy habit, when you're taking something that you believe is going to be benefiting your health, it shouldn't be contaminated with heavy metals.
Oh, for sure.
And xenobiotic, endocrine disrupting compounds, forever chemicals, BPA, and the like.
But we will get there. So we keep driving for it. We can see the Clean Label Project is driving for it. And there's a lot of other organizations. We also seen positive movement in with EWG and skin and health, beauty products. There's a movement. The consumers do not want that, right, as a side effect of their smoothie or their eye cream or whatever they're using. So we will get there. It takes time. That's what we see. It's a long, hard push, but we will get there.
It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Well, Oliver, thanks for coming out. I'm a fan of Puori. I take your guys' fish oil all the time, protein powder as well. How can my listeners and viewers check you out, learn more about the company, and try some of your products?
You can you go to puori.com, like Puori.com, and you can find us on social media, the classic places. I post sometimes. I'm not a big social media person myself, but you can also find me on social media, Oliver Amdrup. And yeah, that's where I would say start with our newsletter, the website, and do your own research.
And promo code MAX.
Promo code MAX, yeah.
So gets you 20% off site-wide.
Yeah, so even on the subscriptions.
Take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for coming out.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's good to be in LA.
Of course.
And we're going to Expo.
Yeah. Going to Expo West, yeah. That is such a good time. I always end up leaving with bags and bags of stuff, and the waste is through the roof. But it's such a great immersion into this industry that we've helped co-create.
For sure.
And I think it's such a beautiful thing. There's so much positivity and optimism, and there is so much good science being done, at the intersection of vitamins and minerals and other supplements and chronic disease prevention, longevity, optimization in so many different regards. And so, I'm just so grateful to be a part of it and to have people such as yourself on the front lines, pushing the envelope forward and inspiring change.
Appreciate it, yeah. And likewise.
Yeah.
So
thank you, brother.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.